Back again, and welcome back to another little mini series. And in my last video, I did explain that I'm going to actually try and show you some of these little components that you might have not seen before, like the single action classes, because I really want you to understand what it is before we start building these applications, so you've got a good idea of how to use it, where do you go about finding all the different components or the different methods that I'm using. And in this quick video, I wanted to take about 15 minutes tops to sort of like quickly go over it, show you where all the files are, show you how we use it, and just kind of quickly sort of like break down the different parts to the logic that I've put in these single action classes. So without further ado, we're going to be jumping straight into it. I'm going to show you exactly what it's made up of, where we use it, and how we use it. So I've got my editor up here as usual, and first thing first, we're going to go into the core directory, because that is where the core files are stored. So it's in, if you download the MagmaCore directory from GitHub, you will find it within the source directory and within the base directory. But because I've already got that set up on here, it's located within my vendor directory, because I'm using the Magma skeleton, which is a library that you could create a project from in your command line, but we'll get into that bit later on. So I'm going to go into my vendor directory. I'm going to go to MagmaCore, source, and base. And this is where I've put it. I've put it in the base directory and a subdirectory called domain. So it's in domain, and this is essentially what this action logic is based off. This is all the file that makes up those logic. So you can see that we're designing by interface. We've got the domain action logic interface. We've got domain logic rules, which is something different, which I'm going to show you when we come to do validation. And we've got the domain traits. So we're going to quickly look into the interface class and see what we've got. So we've got a regular interface that consists of about 6 methods. We got the execute method, we got a render method, we got the with method, form, table, and end. And the end method simple prints out or render to your screen all the settings that we've applied to the above methods. So this is the more important, or the most important method within this component, is the execute method, because that is the method that we pass first in the chain. It is where we pass in all the parameters that the domain trait looks for, and is able to then use properties from any controller objects to actually build that logic. So the first argument is the actual controller that the request is coming to. So we pass the controller as the first argument. The second one is the entity. So, and like I said in my last video, the entity is directly related to the model, right? The third argument is if we're dispatching any events on that particular route, we can pass in a event, and we can do we could actually submit data on that event, or we could have subscribers and listeners listening for that event, and can take that data that we've submitted and do different stuff with it. The fourth argument is object schema. That's our next video by itself that I'm going to touch on next. Method. I want to know the method that is calling, that is using that execute method. So we'll pass the method name as the fifth argument, and that is how I'm able to automatically try and build, or automatically try and find the template to render for that particular route. And rules is something I've added in to allow me to have some rules on a particular method. Like for example, on the front end side of it, where we got a profile, if a user wants to update their password or their email, then I can add a rule in that says, in order for you to update that email, you have to verify your password. And that's what that is. But we won't be using that in the back end. It's more like for the front end that we're going to be using that particular argument. And the last argument within that execute method is additional context. And what that is an array of data we can then pass, or additional data we can pass, that is going to go bind, that's going to actually go and joined up with the data that we're already submitting, that is going to go to our event dispatcher, right? So any additional information that you want to pass, you can do that on a method by method basis, right? So that's the biggest method. It's the one that changes from logic to logic. So other method I've got is that render method. The first argument is optional. As I was saying in the last video, you could pass a template in, or if you leave it blank, it will automatically try and find a template that matches that particular route. And I've also made the extension customizable, because you might be having template that is HTML, or it might be a PHP template, or a Twig template, whatever. You can actually change that, and it's equal to by default, which is the current index position of the HTML that I've specified within my YAML config file that you're going to find out in the config directory, right? So you can change it from there. And the with method simple allows us to pass in additional variables to our template. That's as simple as it is. We can pass in additional variables apart from the one that I'm already assigning to each template. The form simple takes in the form that you want to render on a particular route. That's as simple as it is. There's additional parameters as well. You can see we've got the form action, and we can dynamically pass the action that the form is going to be submitted to. And data is a repository or a model that we can pass. So for instance, if we're on a route that's got a token, i.e. a ID route, we can actually get the data and pass it directly to our form, so we can do certain things, or get that data for that based on that token from our database. And table simple takes uses a table component to build and display a data table that contains all of our data. That's pretty much all it is. The parameters that I have defined within this table method allows us to customize all the information that we can pass to our table. Let's go off here. Right. Sorry about that. And the last method, as I'm saying, is the end method, and that's the last method on the chain. And you have to call it because this is the method that handles rendering all that data to our view. So that is the sixth method currently I have got in my domain action logic, and it's located within the base directory in the domain subdirectory. Other bits that I've got is a subdirectory called actions, and that's where I put all the logics, right? So I'm going to quickly go over one with you so you can see what it looks like. I think I did touch on this briefly in my last video, but I want to actually go over it in detail so you got an idea of what it's actually doing. So the easiest one I'm going to show you is the new action. Let's close this bar down. And the new action simple means when we got a new route, we can actually use the logic within this single action class to submit data to our database, or any kind of storage that we're trying to submit data to. But by default, we're doing that to our database, right? So one thing I want to point out before we go any further, these single action classes, you might notice that we're implementing an interface, but I've only got the one method within these classes, right? Now we know in PHP or any other language, if we're implementing interface, we have to implement all the methods. But doing that would have mean having a lot of duplicate code, and that was not really the route that I want to go down. So what I've effectively done, I've used a trait, right? A PHP trait. And what I'm able to do with the trait is I can build the 5 remaining methods from an interface within that trait, because they're going to be same across any logic. They're going to be the same. The only method that's going to change is that execute method, because that needs to be different. The logic needs to be different for every route, right? So using a trait like so, the interface then sees all 6 methods, right? But effectively, I've only got the one method per action classes, which I think works better, because it means I'm not having duplicate code in all my action classes. So first thing first is we've defined the execute method. We've got all the parameters that we've set out in the interface, and the first thing that I'm doing within the body of the method is I'm creating some properties, and I'm storing some of those arguments, or piping some of those arguments to those class properties, right? That way I can actually access those properties from my trait, because I will need to access those within my other method so I can do certain things as well. And that's the reason why I've piped them to properties, because when I do it like that, I can access these class properties within my trait. That's just how it works. And you can see, first thing we're doing, we're checking if we've got our form builder component set up and ready. If we have, we're going to fetch the isForm valid method, which is a method within our form builder component, and we're checking that we're using the get submit value method, which is a method in my trait class. And what that basically does, it gets the name or get the value from the submit form. So we're checking that we're submitting our data from the right form, right? If it doesn't match, it will fail. It will throw an exception. We got CSRF built into the form component, which is something I don't think I've ever been through with you guys, but I've got a form builder component, and the CSRF validation is built in. So every form that you build for your site will have those tokens, and we have to check to make sure those tokens are valid before we proceed. Again, if it fails at that point, nothing will happen. At this bit, I am now storing all the data that is being submitted into our framework. I'm storing it within this form data variable, right? And we're doing a little check saying if the data that is coming in, if it's a JSON data, like for example, if it's an API, we're conditionally checking that and we're passing the data accordingly. So if it's an API, we're going to get the JSON data from getJSON data, which is a method also located within our form builder component. Else, if it's not a API data, it's going to be a standard form data. And I'm aware that data could be submitted from a lot of different stuff, but by default, these are the two that we're sort of like working with: JSON data and form and submitted form data. And also, you might notice I'm using controller, which is the first argument of that execute method, and it's simple going to get the current controller. So if I quickly show you an example so you can see visually what I'm saying. So if I go into a admin controller, just pick user controller, you can see that if I go to my show action method, for example, let's try to find a new one. All right, new action method, for example. You see, we call the new action object and we call that execute method. So to pass the first argument, the current controller or current object, we're going to be using the this keyword, which represent the current object that we're in. So by doing that, I'm storing that within this controller variable. By doing that, I can access any property or method within that controller object, which is what I am doing right here. So I'm calling controller and I'm calling form builder. But wait a minute there. Let's look into my user controller again. These are the properties that I talked about in my last video. We got the add definitions or the DI container, and that contains a key value pair of keys and object, or properties and object. So, and I was also saying that these are like local dependency for each object. But you notice that we haven't got a form builder in here, right? But that is a global component that is defined within the base controller, which means any controller class can actually have access to that form component, even non-admin controllers, because once we're extending into that base controller, we can access that component from any controller. So that's the reason why it's not defined within these local objects, because it's globally accessible to any controller object, which is defined within the base controller. And I can actually show you that quickly as well. So if I go back down into my core directory, let's find the base controller. And in my base controller, you can see I've got this di container method, which is calling in, or which is taking in one argument, which is an array, and that array is going to be that a YAML file that I have got called providers. And what that provider does, it lists out all the global component that I want to be accessible from any controller. So if I show you that config file, so let's close this up for a bit. This config file, and it's called providers, and this is effectively what it looks like. This is what I've defined as all the global component that can be accessible. And here we've got our form builder. We've also got our event dispatcher, because I want that to also be globally accessible from any controller, plus a few others as well, like table grid that we use to build our data table, right? These are not unique to any controller, they're globally accessible. All right, let's get back on track with what we were doing. Let's close that. So back to our new action. That's how we're able to access like form builder, because we got the current object, which is our controller. We can access the form builder object and call the method that we want, right? So once I've stored those data that is coming in, I'm also going to create a next variable called entity collection, because that is the return of the next method that we're going to be calling, which is the controller repository. So if we look into our controller class again, repository represent the user model, but right now I've got an alias called UM, and if we look into my namespace, UM is simply referencing the user model, right? It's right there. So that's what the repository is, and really I should have called this a model, but I probably will change that at some point to make it more, so when you see, you know exactly what it is. So it's really the model that I'm calling, but I've called it repository for some reason, and I've done it from day one, and I've not really sort of like changed it, but I probably will change it to model at some point. So again, we're calling controller repository, and that gives us access to that repository object, and from that we're calling this get entity, right? Now I touched on this in the last video as well. So if I look into the base model, because I want you guys to understand where I'm coming from with these. So if I look into the base model, and let me also bring up a model from my app directory. Let's just get the user model for argument's sake. Right, in our user model, you'll notice that we're passing in the third argument that I mentioned as well, the user entity, which is directly linked to a model, right? And the job for the entity is to sanitize those data that's coming in and return some clean data as a collection, right? So we've passed that in as the third argument to the base model constructor. So if I look into the base model, you can see in the constructor, we've got that third argument right there, right? Which is our entity coming in as a string, because we're going to inject that as a dependency to our base model object, our base model class. So we're also checking that any entity, it has to extend the base entity, else we're going to throw an exception, and I have not passed a message right here, which is something I should do as well. So we're checking that if it's an instance of the base entity, if it's not, we're going to throw an exception. So once we do that, we've stored that object, because now it came in as a string and now it's an object called. So as I was saying, this entity is calling the base application, which is using the di get method, which basically puts that into a container and it's going to automatically do its business for us, right? So we can then return that property as a method down here called get entity, right? So that's how we're able to now access our entity object, because we've returned it as a method within our model. So if I go back to new action, where am I? New action. You can see that we're now calling repository, and we're calling that get entity method. And from there, we can call the wash, rinse, and dry method. I know it's a play on words, but that's pretty much what I've gone with. And I can quickly show you that method as well, that class as well, which is going to be our base entity class, which is in our base directory as well. So base entity is where we've got those three methods called wash, rinse, and dry. So you can see what we're doing. We're taking in that data in the wash method as dirty data. We're treating it as dirty data, right? So we're checking that we have got some data. It's not empty. If it is, we're going to throw an exception, because at this point, if there's nothing there, then there's nothing to do, right? So once we get past that stage, we're storing that dirty data as a property for this particular class, and we're returning this because these are all chainable methods. Down in the rinse method, which is the second method in this chain, we're taking that property, and again we're checking the data type this time, make sure it's a valid data type. We're going to throw an exception if it isn't, and at this point, if we do get past that, we're going to create a next property called clean data. That's going to equal to sanitizer. Let's bring that up so you can see it. Sanitizer : clean, which is a utility object within the utility directory within the core of the framework. And that simple cleans and sanitize all the information that's been submitted. And we're going to also return this, because this is also a chainable method, as I've mentioned. And the last method in that chain is that dry method, which is going to return a collection object, which is what we're doing right here. And I've not touched on the collection because I have not really used it that much. And in all honesty, I don't think it's going to serve a lot of purpose in what we're doing right here. But if it ever becomes useful, the collection object has got a lot of method that we can use to further filter the data that we're passing to it. But that's a subject for a different video. So that's the three method I've got in the entity class. So let me close that down. Entity. Let me close the model down because we're finished with that. Close our user model and back to our new controller. So at this point, we've called our repository, we call the entity, we call those chainable method. We've passed that form data to the wash method, which is going to sanitize it. It's going to return a entity collection, right? Again, I've now created another variable called action, right? And that is equal to controller repository. And this time we're getting the repo, and within the get repo, within the repository object, which is, we've got quite a lot of methods, but the ones that we want to be using is the validate repository method. And that takes in, I think it takes in 3 arguments, but the third one is optional. But the tool that is required is that entity collection, which we've just sort of like got right here, which is that clean data, and our entity object, because I think this takes the entity object as a string. Well, I should have called it entity string or something like that, but because it's not an object at this point, it's simply a string, which is what we're getting from the second argument within that execute method. It's a string because we're going to turn that into an object within this validate repository method, not turn it into an object, but what we're doing there is we're using that to create or validation classes, right? And I will quickly show you that as well. So we call the get repo validate repository pass in the two required argument for our new action logic. If this was a edit action logic, then the third argument will be required. And then once we call that second method, then we call the persist after validation. Now it's good to note that, or I should note that, if the validation fails at this point, this method does not get executed, right? Only if validation passes, then we can push that data to our database. So if this action variable returns true, if everything went well, then and only then we want to dispatch any event. And again, we're calling the controller, we're getting our event dispatcher object, which I've showed you earlier within that providers, that YAML file, which is being loaded from our base controller. And we're calling the controller event dispatcher, we're calling that dispatch method, right? And this takes in it takes in two arguments. And the first argument is the actual event that we're trying to dispatch. And that event that we're dispatching is in our user controller, which is going to be, let's find that new action method again. And this is going to be the third argument, which is going to be that user action event, right? So let me quickly show you what that file looks like, because I want to actually put that into a separate video as well, so I can put a little bit more context onto it. But let me quickly show you. So that is located within our event directory. So if I open that, let's find our user action event. Let's find our action user event, and all it contains is a constant with a unique name that identifies this particular event. And there's a convention to the name as well. And it goes like this. So we're taking the namespace of the actual class and the name of the class. So we got app / our backtick event. So we got app.event.user action event, which is the name of the class, user action event. And that is our unique identifier for this particular event, user action event, right? So this is a bare bone of what each event class is going to look like. You know, you need to create individual events for whatever is it that we're trying to do, but the name must be unique to that event. And we're extending the base action event, which is also located within the base directory. So if I go down to my base directory again, look at the base action event, it simply contains three methods, right? And that's going to be the method, the get method, get context, and get object method. Now the get object method is simply returning the calling controller, the controller which is dispatching that event. That could be any controller. The context, the get context, is the data that we're submitting to that event, so our listeners can use that data to do what it wants to do with it. And the get method is the method that is dispatching that event, because we need to get that as well, so we can make sure that whatever event that we're dispatching is being dispatched on the correct method, right? So that's the three method within the base action event, and every event within our app directory going to extend into this. So all we then need in these app event files is just a unique name for that particular event. So let me close that down. So back into our new action, that event that we're dispatching as the third argument right here, what we do need is those three arguments that I just mentioned: the method, the context, and the object, which is what we're passing right here. The method, the context, and the actual controller object. So in the context, I'm merging two arrays together. You notice the additional context that I mentioned earlier is any additional information that we can pass to our event to dispatch. And we're getting the actual data that's been submitted, the clean, validated data. We're accessing that through our controller again, repository, get repo, and we're getting the validated data bag. That's what I called it, right? And that contains all the data that was submitted, and it goes through the process of being sanitized and validated, so we know for sure that when that data comes back to our event dispatcher, it's going to be clean and it's going to be valid, right? So that's the three arguments that we pass into our dispatcher. And the second argument within our dispatch method is that unique name for our event, because that is important. We cannot have two event class with the same name. It's gonna throw an error. And that's pretty much what the single action class look like for submitting data to our database. Now the edit action event, which is what I can show you quickly. If I go to edit action event, you'll notice that it's pretty much the same, with the difference being that third argument within the validate repository method. We're passing that third argument in, because this is going to be the data for that single row of data that we can fetch. And you can see that we're getting that data, we're getting that ID from this particular method called this route ID. So any route that's got an ID, we can get the ID using this route ID method, and that's going to return the actual token ID within our URL. And instead of calling the persist after validation, on the edit action we're calling save after validation, right? And that also takes in a couple of arguments, because we need to know what object we're saving. So we need the ID for that particular object, which is what we're calling right here again, this route ID. And we also need the primary key for that particular object, and we're getting that from our controller repository get schema ID, which is going to be the primary key for our database table. So we're getting all these information dynamically. There's nothing hard coded right here, and that's the reason why I can use these logic in any controller, whether that's going to be submitting data to a database, or if I'm editing data and resaving it to the database. It's all very dynamic. So that's the event dispatching, and I want to do a separate short video just to cover event dispatching and what it looks like and how we use it, right? But that's a quick rundown of single action classes. You've seen the interface, you've seen the actions, and they're pretty much going to be the same in terms of how they're laid out, with the only difference being the logic that we're implementing, right? And also, I've not shown you the domain trait, which just consists of methods that helps us to build our logic. So that's pretty much what it is. So if I quickly show you that file, let's close this down, domain traits. You can see what I'm simply doing right here is building quite a lot of helper function that's going to help me get certain information that I can use to build the bigger methods. So we got stuff like, let's look for our table. You see, our table method is pretty much grabbing those information using the properties that we've defined, within our controller. So you can see what I was saying in the execute method. I've now got access to this controller, which I can then use to get other properties or method within the current object. So I'm pretty much calling our data table, and I'm passing all the necessary arguments to it. And this is where I'm submitting these variables to our template that we can use. Hence the reason why in the last video I showed you I was calling the table variable, but it wasn't defined within the actual method. These are where they're all defined. So you can see, once I've established this array with all these variables, I'm then storing them within this super context array, and I'm just merging all those, and I'm merging the context from the with method with this super context to have one big giant array of data that I can that we automatically pass into each of our templates, and that is being done within this end method, right? We're checking that we've got data within these variables, and then with some simple returning our render method, which is a method defined within our controller, in our base controller, which has access to the template object, which builds that view template for us. And we're simply calling that template, calling that object and that render method, and passing in the required argument, which is going to be the name of the template, which we're doing automatically, and the context that we want to pass to our template. So that's effectively what the domain trait does. It implements the 5 remaining methods from our interface, and we're also doing some little utility method as well that helps us to build these out. But I would want you guys to go and take a look within this domain trait and to see what we've got going on. But the important part of this, what I want you to take away from this, is the actual single action classes and the logic behind them, because that's what we're using within our controller, right? So I hope that helps. I'm going to be trying to do these little quick fire videos just to help you get up to speed with what we're doing when we come in to build our application, because I really want you guys to understand what we're doing and understand my thinking behind certain things. And this is also the first time I'm using my camera that I've got on my tripod for the past 7 months, and I've not turned it on. I have done videos like this before, but I'm using my webcam sometimes, my old cheap webcam. But now I've switched on my camera for the first time, and I'm actually putting a video out with me on my camera that I've bought that I've never used. Right? So I hope that helped, guys. I'm going to be doing these videos while I'm building this application along the line, so you up to speed with what we're doing. So stay tuned. The next one coming up is going to be looking at the event dispatching, so you've got a good understanding of that as well. And then we're going to be getting into our application build. So stay tuned, stay blessed, peace out.